Hey team, welcome back to the show. Today it is Coach Natalie and I, once again, here with the founder of www.tinylast.com. Great
God.
to be back on the mic. All right, Natalie, we are going to be doing a Q&A today. So we just put out for listener questions. We got a ton of them. It would appear, as is probably no surprise to either of us, that you are way more popular than I am because you got a shit ton of questions.
Ah,
But before we get into that, anything new with you this week you want to fill us in on?
I don't believe so. Not a lot of updates other than I survived the flu. I'm alive. So trading is like starting to pick up again. Like it's just things are just starting to feel like really good. So I'm at that point where I'm just super like hype about everything. And like I was basically on my deathbed. I think my clients know. A few of them were like, "Why didn't we get a video from you this week?" And it's like, I could not be on camera. I am sorry. I was very ill. My voice was virtually non-existent and also really low. And it's just like the energy difference has been night and day, and it's just been like so nice to like return to doing my check-ins feeling like so full of energy. And
Oh yeah.
it's just been a much better week. So I'm in a very good mood.
You need the lows to appreciate the highs.
Truly,
That's
truly.
how I've this whole week. I've just been in such a good mood because it's like, oh my God, I just feel so good.
I
It
don't
is
feel like shit anymore.
it's so funny how you just take feeling normal for granted. And then
Truly.
even like when you have a cold and every night you're like stuffed
Yeah.
up and you can't sleep and when you're back to normal. But I feel the same way. Well, good. I'm glad to hear it. Sounds like everybody's training is back to feeling good. We have a ton of questions here, so let's just go ahead and get into it. Natalie, Angela. Call Andrea Angela all the time. I'm a woman of many names, so I get that mixed up. Angela Halverson, shout out to our girl AH, asked, "What is the most underrated machine at the gym?"
Are you going first? Am I going first?
Take it away. I'll let you get the first one.
Depends on what gym.
Oh God,
Um,
just answer the
hey,
question.
okay. Um, okay, I confess, like I didn't give this much thought ahead of time because I wanted to kind of see what I'd come up with on the fly. So, all right. I'm gonna go with I might say like the Smith machine because I feel like it kind of gets a bad rap
Oh,
sometimes.
good call. Yeah.
Like I feel like it's undervalued. Yeah, underrated, generally speaking. And I find I use it a lot actually. And then there are some gyms like I have clients that are at gyms that like don't have a Smith. And I'm like, okay, that's like criminally underrated at that point. And then I'm going to say I feel like I could also make a case for like a functional trainer, like where the arms are movable. Because I think a lot of gyms like are like, oh, well, you just gotta have like cables, and then you'll notice they'll have like the wide cables or something, and like, yeah, I mean, of course, we can use those and do a lot with them.
Wide cables kind of suck,
Yeah, truly. Um,
relatively.
but but sometimes like those are the only cables.
Yeah.
So it's like, do people not get
A
like how
shocking amount of
valuable of
times.
yeah, do people not like understand or get how valuable like a functional trainer is? And I'm always confused when people don't have them. So I think that is my first thought. Those are my first thoughts.
The Smith machine is a really, really good shout. I would say, I mean, even if I was building a home gym,
Mm,
past adjustable bench dumbbells, like a doorway pull up bar, I would probably choose like a Smith machine next as
yeah.
my next piece of equipment. It's so versatile for hypertrophy training. I mean, honestly, like most of your barbell work, you could just replace with that. And
Yep.
that's a really good shout. The first two things that came to mind to me were preacher curl machine. Really, really like a machine preacher curl. Like I would say, like for a bicep movement, if I'm just gonna program one, that's probably gonna be it. Not training at long muscle lengths, which I don't think is as important for the biceps, but really it's like so stable. We can just load it up, get really good output. And actually, the adductor machine, I went a lot more
Okay.
like niche than you. I feel like the adductor machine gets a like, oh, Kegels type, you know what I mean, type thing. But I don't know if this is just like a dude thing where I don't know if this is as true for women, but I program and use the adductor machine a lot. a lot of, a lot of like the guys I coach, it's like, dude, you like have a thigh gap. We can probably work on that. But also even for like I think for everyone, a lot of people's adductors aren't well enough developed.
Mm-hmm.
But then and that's like people don't realize like for your lower body to like bring more density to your legs, how important the adductors actually are. Like your legs will just look skinny if your adductors aren't well developed. But also for
And you
like,
would know.
oh yeah, I was gonna make that joke actually, but I didn't. But also,
Thank you
I
for
don't know,
saving
being too
that for me.
self-deprecating. You're welcome. But also, even for like programming it before someone does RDLs, I love it. Right, us
Hmm.
being able to basically open up our hips, very important for that. It's such a good way to like, hey, we get some growth stimulus there, but also we kind of prime for our compound movements. I really like the adductor machine as well, but I would for sure like go with Smith machine over all that. So great shout. What is something you see all clients going through at one point in their journey? Common challenges. Also from Angela Halverson.
Thank you for your questions, Angela. Um, Angela, who is like a master at maintenance, by the way, which is not a title I bestow easily or often. So shout out to Angela. Um, I'm gonna say I think I could really focus on a few different things here, but the one that springs to mind, I'm gonna say um, when you have had success, like if you come from a place where you've like struggled in the past with fat loss, and fat loss has been really hard for you. You like can't maybe prior to coaching haven't figured it out. Just haven't been successful. Regained all your weight. Um, a very common challenge is fear and like almost paranoia coming out of a successful fat loss phase. In that reverse, and then that transition to maintenance, like fear that you're going to gain it all back, that you're going to go exactly back to where you came from. That is a very common challenge, and rightfully so. Like I understand psychologically, and I've been through it myself. Um, yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I would fully agree. See the same a lot. Um, Two things that stand out to me, figuring out your RDLs. I think everyone, I don't, I've actually, who was it? I had someone very recently where I was like, damn, you nailed your RDLs first video you sent over to me.
Was it
But it
me?
is, no, it was definitely wasn't you. Remember how long we worked on RDLs? But I'm in the same boat. Um,
And then I was like, all you needed to do is tell me to just do like pretend like I was doing a conventional deadlift and not touch the floor. And I was like, oh, why didn't you just say
yeah,
so?
could have simplified that one a little bit. Um,
But yeah,
Mastering
that's
your
a
RDLs
great
takes a very
shout.
long time, and trying to figure out what hard training actually looks like, feels like,
Mm.
realizing you have a lot more in the tank than you think you do, and
Yes.
probably having a week or two where you are kind of bummed out because you feel like your coach has been telling you every week for the last couple months that we still have more in the tank. Pretty normal. I've been there myself. It's not, we don't think you're bad people or anything of the sort. Um, it's just a very normal part of coaching. Okay. Anything else you would add there?
No, those are great ones though. I second those.
Cool. All right, let's bounce around a bit to spread out some of the love.
Okay.
Um, how to approach a build phase from a nutrition standpoint. Do you want to keep taking these first? Do you want me to take some of them first?
Where are we on the
I
list? I'm a
am narrowed
visual.
down to this one is from Anna
Oh,
Higgins.
there. Okay. I'm a visual person, so I need to stare at
Yeah,
something
sorry,
so I
we're kind of
can
all over the place.
comprehend it. How to approach a build phase from a nutrition standpoint. Well, I think this is a great question, because I think it's a very common question that people have. Um, but I think there's a fallacy in the way that this is worded, in the sense of we can't just approach a build phase from a nutrition standpoint. There has to be the training component has to be there. Um, but I do understand like what she means. So assuming that your training is in like a really great place, meaning like you're set up with like appropriate volume, your training intensity is there, like you can go hard, you're recovering well. If you would like to build muscle more efficiently, then perhaps like a building phase is for you. And so that would be a slight calorie surplus. Um, this is one where I like to start out very small. As to not kind of like take a flying leap over that maintenance line, right? We kind of just want to dip our toe. Because what I have found is that most people don't need as much food as they think that they need to grow. When we don't see, like, if we're in a calorie surplus, we should be seeing the scale going up incrementally. Um, but a lot of times, I think that people like are not seeing the scale go up. They're not seeing it go up as far as much or as quick as they think they do. And so they just think that they just need more food. And that I found that to not be the case. Usually I find some sort of like issue with their training.
Hmm.
And we should be getting some signs that we kind of want to push food. Maybe we're seeing training stalls. Maybe like, hunger starting to like really ramp up or something. But those are generally things that I look for. But what would you say in terms of like, hey, I'm positive this person's training is in a good place. I think we're ready to go into a surplus. Like, if you had to put a percentage on it, what would you say?
Like
Ish.
for rate of gain.
No, for for like I'm gonna push your calories up X%.
Yeah. I honestly don't really focus too much on percentages, but I would probably just start at like 5% over
Yeah.
their maintenance intake if I did want to. I mean, I would say I'm typically working more on like 50 to 100 calorie
Yeah.
increases. I'll almost always, like if someone's starting a building phase, we're almost always going to be starting from maintenance. And even
Hmm.
if it's like we transition out of the fat loss phase, reverse diet, even if it's someone who's like, hey, we're ready for an advanced building phase, that reverse diet, there's a couple weeks where we're at maintenance, we're kind of finding like what the maintenance is. And we're already focusing on building. So we're already kind of building from maintenance. And then I really just go from there. Like,
Yeah.
okay, from there, I mean, then I'm really just looking at like their training logbook. Am I seeing them consistently get stronger? Are we getting like a medium or high stimulus? Ideally high. Is their recovery okay? How are their training videos? Like, are they training hard? Are we
Hmm.
executing well? Unless someone's hungry, like if someone's hunger is manageable and they're just not training hard, and I'm calling
Yeah.
it where I'm maintenance, I'm not gonna bump their food higher because it's not gonna
Same.
do. It's not gonna, again, given I can tell it's not just like, wow, this person's really hungry and they feel like shit and that's why they're not performing well. Given I don't think that's the issue, I'm not gonna bump their food higher until I see them training harder and then still
Yep.
actually see a need for it. But I mean, then I would be looking for like training performance, like is their perceived rating of that like 8 out of 10 or higher? Hunger, like typically 3 out of 10 or lower. Energy levels are good. Even like looking at their progress pictures over time. And I would say like, but like for when we're increasing food, I'm less concerned with like progress pictures and body measurements. Honestly, that kind of comes as a byproduct of doing these things right. I would really say
Yeah.
like their training performance, their energy levels, their hunger, their recovery. Like I have a client, AJ, who one of my Canadians, one of many it seems, who he's been crushing it in building every week. Well, we're like in a recomp phase really because his calories are quite high.
Hmm.
He weighs like 160. We have him at like 3,100 to 3,200 calories a day consistently. And we like last week we saw, man, like weight dropped a little bit actually. And then alongside that,
Mm.
his progression and his training the last couple weeks has slowed. And last week it actually started to regress a little bit. Hunger was up. Really not a whole lot at all, actually. But his weight dropped, his training dropped. So we bumped his food up. Bumped him pretty aggressively. I bumped him like
Mm.
250 calories. This week, actually, physique looks better. Weight came back up a little bit, and performance is so much better again. So really, there it's again like basing it on someone's biofeedback.
Hmm.
I mean, to bring it back to the nutrition setup, though, yeah, basically just I would hey protein somewhere between 1 and 1.5 grams per pound of body weight. Fats typically going to be like zero point 0.3 to zero point 0.5 grams per pound of body weight, depending on how heavy the person is. If we're like obese, we're probably not doing a building phase in the first place. So that's a pretty good rule of thumb. And then typically I'm going to try to push carbs quite high
Yeah.
past that. And then just making sure like the basics we talked about on the podcast so much with like our pre-workout, our post-workout, our intra-workout
Hmm.
nutrition. I would like start with pre and post, like making sure typically we have like at least 20-25% of our daily carbs in the pre-workout meal. Same thing goes for post-workout. And then once the person's in a place where, hey, hunger isn't a problem at all, we have a good amount of food coming in, and I see a need for more food, or feel like their body can handle more food and only like lead to a positive in performance without fat gain, then that's when I'll start to add like intra-workout carbs like Gatorade or highly cyclic
Hmm.
dextrin, because that'll again like kind of further improve our training performance recovery. Kind of all over the place with this answer, but is there anything else that you would add on that front?
Yeah, I'll say that in builds, I really like to have an intra workout present because for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, food's getting high, so it's just easier to get in. And in a lot of my clients who are building, I actually like don't even have them track their intra. I'm just like, just it's just like part of your training day. Just like
Yeah.
just add it, and like because eventually we will go into some sort of deficit, right? And so
Right.
I like to keep that in as long as possible. So if that's kind of just been like a baked in part of
I
their
like that.
day, like I like doing that a lot. And also we need to understand that like if you are someone, if you're a candidate for a dedicated building phase via calorie surplus, your goal, you have a pretty serious goal of adding muscle, right? Like you're serious about it. So if you're serious about it, it tells me that you want to optimize and you want to do as many things, you know, as well as you can. And so I am going to really harp on your peri workout nutrition, and that includes that intra workout. So big emphasis there, like you said. So like most of your calories are going like if, every time you push food, those increases are primarily going to be coming via carbohydrate. I will add a caveat that if and when, hopefully never, but if at some point digestion starts to become an issue, or like hey, like I'm just having trouble like getting this down, then like adding fats can be helpful
Yeah.
because it's like not that hard to like drizzle some olive oil on something or like have some nuts. They're like low volume foods. So if like food volume is getting very high and it's like we're just I don't see this often, especially like we primarily work with like female clientele. So it's like we're not talking about like bodybuilder dudes, that are having to push like 5 and 6,000 calories a day in the off season. Um, so what I'm talking about now, like realistically, probably won't come into play for a lot of people, but digestion is a thing, and that's something we definitely want to preserve at all costs. So if that starts to become an issue, or you're just like really getting sick of food, that's where I might like bump fats.
Yeah, I would say that probably applies to like 5% of clients where there aren't very many instances of, wow, this is just so much food. I'm so sick of
Yeah.
eating. And we have to like, there are times though, it is a little bit more common that like from a digestive perspective, we do have to, yeah, go with like slightly higher in fats. I think though, like when it comes to one thing that I do think is slightly overplayed, we talk about like the importance of like fat for hormonal health, and it is important.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, the cholesterol from fat is like building block for synthesizing new hormones, but like almost every cell in your body produces cholesterol on its own also. So like I think the dietary fat, especially like men, I hear a lot of like, well, I like more fat will kind of supercharge my testosterone. And I do think that
Mm,
I find for women, just from a biofeedback perspective, it seems like feel a lot better with actually like, hey, we have, yes, closer to that
yeah.
like zero point 0.4 to zero point 0.5 grams of fat per pound of body weight. For men, I especially I think like you can like live on a decent bit lower fat than, not that it's like bad necessarily. If you want to like split hairs, it does seem, I mean, like the thermic effect of carbs is higher than the thermic effect of fat.
Hmm.
And the research does very consistently seem to indicate like it is a lot harder for a body to store carbs as fat than it is fat as fat.
Yeah.
Um, kind of just an aside, but I do think like that from that perspective, like the fat gets a little bit overplayed. Like I believe the research does like people are talking about when it's like how it is, yes, important for your testosterone levels, but it's like the studies on it boosting testosterone where like, hey, you were deficient in whatever before, and now we have inadequate amounts, and so it'll of course improve things, but it won't like skyrocket it further past that point. Anything else to add there?
No, I hope it's probably like in every direction that she didn't really expect, but hopefully we got you covered, Anna.
What is your biggest gym ick, Natalie? Katie Newman wants to know.
All right, I'm gonna give a shout out to Katie because I happen to know that her biggest gym ick is people taking their shoes off. She hates it. It's so funny. So Katie is a client of mine who also happens to go to my gym, and it's I enjoy her commentary. It is hilarious. Um, my biggest gym ick, it's like let me pull out the scroll because it's a very long list. It's like a tome. It's a tome, really.
I carved it in stone.
It's like yeah, like a Beowulf size of gym icks. Um, I mean, off the top of my head, it really, I mean, I can list a few, but it really bothers me when people don't put their weights back or like they put them back improperly, you know? So it's like they've got 45s, 25s, fives, two and a halves, and it's like it that drives me wild. So that's one. And then like kind of tandem with that is like when people they don't put their weights back, they leave them on the machine or something. Um, it's really common like gym culture to see like on a leg press for example them to leave like one plate per side, you know, just almost as a courtesy to the next dude. But like in my experience most gyms I've been to quite a few, there are people of all ages, abilities, sizes that go to that gym. So like, you know, if my grandma went to the gym to train and walks up to the leg press, she might not be able to do one plate per side.
Hmm.
So I think that's super rude to leave it on.
Okay. Um, Honestly, I'm having a hard time thinking of, I don't
I
know,
mean, I can
like,
keep going
oh,
while you think about
uh,
it.
the gr I don't know if I'm trying to think too literally. The only thing I can think of, I don't feel like I can think of a lot of things where I'm like, oh, I hate that that person's doing it right now. The one gym I was going to here for a while, every time I would do my mobility before I would like start my training session, when I would get up, there would just be they just never cleaned the gym and there would just be like
Mm.
balls of human hair like
Oh
stuck to my
God.
arm. That was pretty gross. I can't I don't know with I don't know why I can't think of anything right now though past that. I don't really feel like I have a lot of things like that that stand out to me.
Like people who are on the
When
treadmill who like sing
it
out
really
loud.
bothers me like when there's other people there who are more jacked than me. I hate that.
You must be pretty annoyed then.
Next up, how has being coached taught you how to coach your own clients? From our girl Aurora.
That's a good question. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I feel like working with other coaches myself, being coached through the process. First is being coached through the things that basically being coached to and beyond like the level of physique development that I would expect like any client to go to or like any client's goals when they work with us to be. Haven't experienced that myself. There is just so much in the process that you can understand, even from like an emotional perspective, right? Even like Lindsay, another one of my Canadians. Shout out to Canada, great people all around. But like my client Lindsay, we're getting ready for a photo shoot, and I was talking about how I was talking in my post on my like week 3 mini cut summary, like, hey, I'm kind of at that point where I'm just depleted, so my muscles are like flatter and smaller, but I'm not lean enough yet that I like can see like new striations or a whole lot of new definitions. So I basically like just feel like I look a little bit more skinny fat than I did before, and I just look worse than I did before. And she was like, "Oh, I didn't even know this was a thing." I was like, "Oh yeah, like when you diet, it's pretty normal for there to be like a month like this, and then on the other side of that is like you start suddenly like, oh wow, I look pretty ripped." And right on the other side of that is like, "Oh, this is really getting good." But that's an example of something where you don't really know it until you've been through it. You don't like learn that in the NASM textbook. Um, I don't think you do at least. And
Maybe
but
maybe
that's a
they've updated it.
I think that's like one really good example. But you learn so much. I personally, I am really, really bad at learning things just by like hearing a sound bite. It's very hard for me to pick something up like that. If I read it, I can learn it very well. But the best way for me to learn things, like honestly, this was like writing blogs for so long back in the day helped me so much. Writing content helps me so much now because a lot of times that's like how I'm learning things myself is applying it, teaching it to someone else, or like going through it myself. So coaching, I love the opportunity to like go through all these things, like experience, like okay, here's like what carb cycling. Here's how that actually works. Like that's like in my work with Brandon DeCruz, that was so helpful for me. Like, okay, I kind of understand the theory of refeeds, but like, okay, this is how I was feeling this day. He gave me a refeed. He pulled back my steps. Here's how I felt the next day. Oh wow, okay, I understand so much more. Like now, what I'm actually looking for with a client, how they might be feeling before to in order to like implement when I might want to implement a refeed, for example. I feel so. I really feel like just little things like that. It just teaches you seeing it firsthand, experiencing it firsthand, and even like understanding from an emotional level, like, yeah, dude, I get it. Like this does suck, or you are gonna be really hungry, and that's okay. Um, it just I feel like it's so important. What would you add there?
Agree with everything that you said. I'm really grateful for all the coaches I've had and everyone I've worked with, because this is how we learn, like what we like and what we don't like. Um, you know, there's no such thing as a perfect coach, because people aren't perfect, but you really get to, I mean, I think coaching is application and delivery, right? And let's assume that the knowledge base is there. So let's assume that you know your stuff. But I always find it really interesting, like application and delivery. Like how like communication, like how what's their communication style? How are they delivering this feedback? Um, and you kind of like hear something or they do something or like you mentioned, maybe it's like their application of like refeeds or trying something that you haven't tried before. It's really normal, like when you learn something, a different way of doing something, to want to try that yourself. And like, oh well, gosh, that makes perfect sense. Like I wonder how might apply this to like my own clients. And so you kind of start doing those things, and I think that is really just like how you truly learn like how to coach.
Absolutely. This lady's about to knock on my door, and Amigo's about to freak out, so you may have to take the next one.
Okay. There it
Um,
is.
how to conquer mental gym anxiety, especially before leg day.
All right. This question is from our girl Heather. Mental gym anxiety. I'm gonna guess this is like exclusively with regards to leg day. I try to use it. Well, okay, first I'm gonna say I used to get really bad gym anxiety, just in terms of like the gym being crowded. Um, so like I would always like to go to the gym like first thing in the morning. And I would just like rush, rush, rush. And it's like, I gotta get there. I gotta get there because the gym, I don't want people to be on my machines. I don't want, and it was creating like so much stress. And I was like, this is so silly. Like, when I like this thing, this training is going to take me as long as it's going to take. So like we don't need to stress about someone being on the hack squat when you need it. Like we'll deal with it. So working through that, like I think this is a good rule of thumb in general if you suffer from like anxiety in terms of like time management and things like that. I just now make sure that I leave myself all the time that I think I'm going to need, so that I don't have to rush. If that means like waking up a little bit earlier, so be it. It is worth it to me to not have that like anxiety about like, oh my gosh, am I gonna like get in, get out in time? Like, is it gonna be crowded? So just allowing yourself like plenty of time. For me, it's like the best part of my day. I love to train, so I also don't want to rush through it. I don't want to feel
Yeah.
anxious about it. So just like, you know, we talk about this all the time, like just like time management and like organizing your schedule and setting yourself up for success there. And then to touch on, anxiety pre-leg day, which I think is very common. Um, it's probably a good sign that you're training pretty hard. So good job. Like if leg day scares you, you're probably doing a pretty good job. But I also think with time, I've come to like actually really look forward to that. Like I always feel so accomplished after leg day. So I'm always thinking about like what a champion I'm gonna feel like after. And I kind of just like hype myself up, to get excited for it. And I also want huge quads. So again, that's one of those things where I'm just always thinking about the long game, like how I'm gonna feel post leg training and like how I'm gonna feel, a year from now when my quads are shredded and jacked.
All right, I like it. So yeah, gym anxiety. I mean, I'm assuming she's meaning just nervous for like a hard, especially before leg day. So before like a hard training session. Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing there is it's like training isn't really that deep. Like it's easy to turn it into like something we're ultimately doing this for fun.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't no one else truly really cares that much like how much more jacked we get. So just like don't let it turn into something that's not fun for you. Like remind yourself that we are here to have fun with it. And again, like I think that a lot of times the anxiety comes from like oh shit, like what if I don't progress? What if I like can't be what I
Mm.
did last week, etc. And like what if you don't? I mean, I think just going into it with the mindset of I'm just gonna like have fun with this, push myself as hard as I can, and you'll progress most weeks. There will be some weeks that you don't. That won't be the end of the world either, right? Again, if you have a coach, they'll tell you if you weren't pushing hard enough or not, and you can get better with it next week. But again, like I think that like the just like the like oh shit, what if I don't progress? And like it was so hard last week, is it gonna be even harder this week? The other thing is like the like your perceived effort, like the perceived difficulty of it doesn't just like linearly increase necessarily. Like you get stronger. So again, like progressive overload is the adaptation. Progressive overload is you push hard last week, so now you can do for 11 what you did for 10 the week prior, right? So like 1 IR, like maybe 400 for 11 this week feels the same as 400 for like 10 last week did. I think that a lot of the anxiety comes from though is like linearly for the rest of my life, every leg session is going to feel even harder. And again, a
Ugh.
lot of times people do need to train harder, but I would really, again, just remind yourself that you're like here to have fun with it. You enjoy pushing yourself. Like this is fun, and just don't let it turn into like, oh, if I don't perform well, I'm gonna hate myself, right? Because again, it just like doesn't have to be that. Like we're ultimately all just doing this for fun. Anything else you would add there?
Yeah, I say just keep your eye on the prize, and that's like,
Swole is the goal and size is the
gnarly
prize.
quads or glutes.
That's right. All right. From here, any if I can't get to a specific piece of equipment, what are the general backups that are your go-tos? Are these all from Joni?
These two, yes.
Okay.
I thought this was a great set of questions. So I
Okay.
think we can like lend some context. So this person says, "I'll be returning to a public gym for the first time in 7 years, and for the first time ever with a coach's program. So if I can't, a little bit of gym anxiety, I guess. So if I can't get to a specific piece of equipment, what are the general backups that are your go-tos? So I will advise this client when the time comes in terms of some swaps. But you have a couple options here. One, you can change the order. Now that does change things, within your program. But like, if you're really pushed for time and like you need to get on that hack squat and someone's on it, okay, we can move on. Maybe to like our leg extension or something. And then we have to understand that because that's not usually the order that we go in, our numbers might differ a little bit. So comparison week to week is going to be a little bit more like apples to oranges as opposed to apples when we're looking at progression. But you do have that option because I do realize that a lot of people are pushed for time. Um, so you can switch up exercise order. And then past that, without getting like very specific in terms of like the specific exercise or equipment she has in mind, you really want to look at like what is the muscle or muscles that you are trying to train. So let's take the hack squat, for example. Like we're trying to train the quads and their length and position, right? Um, so okay, so that someone is doing like 20 sets on the hack squat. Good luck to them. But like they're gonna be there for the foreseeable future. Okay. You actually do have another option I'll mention, which is you can ask them to work in. So that is like in terms of gym etiquette, like that is acceptable. And if they say no, they are an asshole and they are wrong. So the correct answer is sure. um, but past that, like if you don't want to work in, I always do like to ask people like, yo, how many sets do you have? Because if they say one or two, I'm like, oh, good deal. I'll like wait it out and just like get some steps in, kind of thing. If they say like five and they've got like 6 plates per side on the hack squat, which is not the weight that I'm at yet, that might not be an equitable partnership to be working in with that person. So, and then this person's got like 5 sets, and you're like, well, gee, like I really don't have that kind of time. So you want to look at the muscles being trained. So in this case, it's like a lengthened quad, right? Okay, so where or how else might I be able to get that? Now there's obviously no like absolutely perfect identical one-to-one substitute. But you could look at some things like, okay, maybe like a heel elevated Smith machine squat. Um, Maybe like a pendulum if you have access to one, which again, not necessarily one-to-one, but you're gonna get a great quad stimulus from it. Um, would be my advice.
Yeah, I would basically look at what's the movement pattern. Is it a squat?
Mhm.
Is it a lunge? Is it a hinge? Is it a push? Is it a pull? And then where is that movement the hardest? Is it hardest at the bottom of the rep or the top of the rep? Okay, can I find another movement like my hack squat? Okay, that's busy as you said, like that super jack person with 6 plates per side is on it. Okay, the leg press is a squat pattern. That's also hardest at the bottom. So not exactly the same, but pretty similar. Or yeah, the pendulum squat. Or I could even like do a Smith machine squat if I had to. Um, Again, that would be, as you said, I would prefer to change exercise order
Mhm.
before we like go with a different variation of the movement and keep that movement in place still. But and it also it's dependent to a degree on the movement, like that like hack squat to leg press. That will be like typically if unless you have the leg press in your program, you're doing it twice a week, we might be able
Mm.
to get a good stimulus from it still. But like if you're not normally leg pressing and that's the first time you are like Smith machine squatting, we're not gonna get like a crazy good stimulus out of that. Versus if it's like, hey, um the Smith machine I normally use for hip thrust is taken, so I'm gonna do a barbell hip thrust. Okay, that's really not a big deal at all in my book.
Yeah.
So it's also somewhat dependent on the movements, but I would still, yeah, prefer swapping exercise order first.
Mhm.
Anything else to
Uh,
add there?
I'll drive the point home. Like ask how many sets that person has. Ask politely, of course, but don't just assume because like that could be their last set, and then you're next in line.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Biggest piece of advice for someone switching from strength to hypertrophy training from
Mm.
Korean Nation.
You want to go first? Or you want me to go?
I think that understanding the goal is somewhat changing, and that strength and strength progression is still important. But when we're looking at strength training, the number one goal is lifting the heaviest weight possible, right? So it is how can I be as efficient as possible with the movement? So for example, if we were looking at someone bench pressing for strength and just to like move the heaviest load possible from point A to point B, you would see that person pressing with a massive, massive arch so that they basically don't have to lower the bar nearly as much to touch their chest. The range of motion is a lot shorter. Now, on the flip side, when we are training for hypertrophy, we are chasing the best stimulus possible. So if I were looking for the best stimulus for my pecs from the bench press, it would look like the opposite of like how that person pressed for to lift the heaviest load, right? Where I want to make sure like that person honestly like for strength, they might almost be like dropping the rep and bouncing it back up. Whereas the exact opposite for hypertrophy, I would definitely want to control the negative. I would want to spend a lot of time in that fully stretched position, even if it means my load I can lift is reduced. And again, really focusing on getting the best stimulus for my pecs. So I think that's the biggest thing is like, don't just chase progression in exchange for don't just change progression at the cost of the stimulus, right? Where the most important thing is actually driving tension to the tissues that we're trying to grow. Very similarly with like range of motion, right? Where they're just like I mentioned with that, with the chest press, or even like I don't know, I think it applies to a lot of movements when we're changing goals here, right? Like if you're trying to grow your quads, your back squat or your squat patterns might look a lot different. They might look a lot deeper. You might be like using heel elevation now and really driving your knees forward, keeping your torso more upright, and you can't move as much load, but we're challenging our quads much more, and thus we're getting a lot better stimulus and we're going to grow more. But again, like it does like the goal changes, and it's not just about like how can I move the heaviest load. Anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I think just understanding the intent of each and how those differ. Like, what are you actually trying to achieve here? And just to sum up kind of what you said, like, you're not trying to move the weight from point A to point B. You're trying to maximize muscle tension. So, like, we're trying to put our muscles under as much tension as possible. The goal isn't like a new 1RM or like to lift the heaviest load possible. So just understanding that intent, I think fundamentally is really important. And I will plug the last podcast that we did that came out earlier this
It's a really
week.
good one to listen to.
It's called like 8 mindset mistakes you're making with your hypertrophy training. I blasted this one to all of my clients because I thought, if I do say so myself, I thought that there were like a lot of applicable takeaways there. And we very much like that entire podcast is basically about this
Yeah.
very thing.
It's
So
Yeah, go back. This will come out on Monday, so this would have come out a week ago today if you're listening to this on Monday.
got it.
Dijon mustard, country ground, or regular?
It's a tough one.
Dijon burns, but it is
I
good.
I do like it,
That's the
but
one that like burns you in your nose, right?
can, I suppose, if you're weak.
Like if you dip a soft pretzel in it.
Yeah, if you're soft,
Am I
I
thinking
guess
of the
it
right
burns.
mustard? Just stop.
Yeah.
Just be serious. Okay.
I can't. I mean, you can. I mean, I think a lot of times they serve pretzels with either like a sweet brown German mustard or like there's also a spicy mustard. So maybe you're probably thinking about Dijon. There is a little bit of a like horseradishy element almost.
Anyways, do you like that better than
No.
country ground or regular?
It depends because I actually really like all mustard. I will say Dijon mustard does have like what 5 calories a serve.
Hmm.
And so if you're cutting, like we actually do need to take those things into consideration. So yellow mustard is rather like quite a staple around here. Because as much as I do love mustard, I don't necessarily want to spend like any calories on it. And I do really, really like the Trader Joe's dill pickle mustard, which is seasonal and comes
I'm
out
a big
every
fan of that.
summer. Oh, it's so good. I buy out the shelves and it's like it comes out over the summer.
You gifted
So
me
you got to
some of
stock
that
up.
too. It is good.
It is so good, but it's like a yellow mustard base.
Almost worth a trip to Trader Joe's, actually.
Mm-hmm. Um, but yeah, what about you? You're gonna say
I gotta
yellow.
go with the regular. As you said, it's the most versatile. Um,
Pairs well with Splenda.
Pairs well with Splenda, very important. Yes, I actually don't do the like Splenda with my mustard thing. I just do the mustard, but
Same.
I don't think the Splenda personally adds a whole lot of like. It doesn't really make it taste better to me, but to each their own on that one. Um, Good one to wrap this up on. What to know for a 46-year-old female thinking about doing a bodybuilding show? Ask So Miss Kate.
That's a good question.
I'm gonna send that to you.
Um, First, I would make sure you get with a coach if you're not already. So you want to be working with a coach. Um, when we're talking about women in their 40s, this is often the time where we start to see some development in terms of like perimenopause. Um, so that can start to creep in. And so your health is very important. And obviously everyone's health is very important, even if you're not a woman in your 40s. But here is where like you want to be working with a knowledgeable coach who will put your health first. Bodybuilding, like competitive bodybuilding, is inherently not healthy. There are aspects of it that are. So a lot of the principles that bodybuilders practice in their day to day, ticking the boxes, are great, and we can learn a lot from that. But when we're talking about getting below essential levels of body fats, our bodies are not meant to be there. Especially as women, our bodies really aren't meant to be there. And now we're taking, someone in their 40s, and we're putting our foot on the gas, so to speak, for that process. So understand first and foremost, I think I'm going to start with understand what it is you're getting into, more than anything, like what you are actually doing, which is like dieting to below essential levels of body fat. So given that you first understand that, you need to next make sure you are with a knowledgeable coach, one that is versed in female health, female reproductive health, perimenopause, menopause, all of those things, that can read your labs and interpret your labs, someone who is going to be a health advocate for you. For anyone interested in bodybuilding, I would recommend getting labs fairly regularly anyways,
For
but
sure.
especially for a 46-year-old female, like we need to be pulling labs like more often than not, probably. Because what's going to be most important here, and this is where that knowledgeable coach comes into play, is when to push you and when to pull you back. So essentially what we're doing is like we're like when you get into a contest prep, which is like the dieting portion, like in the lead up to the stage, you are digging yourself into a hole. And you need to be confident that you have a knowledgeable coach that knows how to dig you out of that hole that you put yourself into, basically. And so I would make sure that my coach like ticks all of those boxes. I would also talk to them about some of the health ramifications, impacts, and y'all need to be on the same page with what you are okay with and what you are not okay with. What I will say is like this puts you in like the masters athlete category. So a lot of masters athletes are at an advantage in that a lot of times if they've had children, they're done having children. So they're not exactly worried about like the family planning aspect of like,
Yeah.
what if I lose my cycle? It's like, well, no, like, I mean, ideally we don't lose our cycle, but I will say this is a very common price to pay for a contest prep. So if you're a 46-year-old woman that still has a cycle, it's not that it's not a big deal if you lose it, but you're not putting your entire future plans on the line, I guess, is what I'm saying for this. And I think for anyone, you need to understand that there are a lot of costs involved. Just in terms of like the actual like entrance fees for these competitions, like travel to from a competition, but also as a 46-year-old female, like all the supplements that you're going to need. Now, that if you listen to this podcast, that, or you coach with us, that Jeremiah and I are not necessarily big proponents of like just putting you on tons of supplements. That's not how we roll. It is different when you're entering into a contest prep and you're serious about bodybuilding, because every health concern that I spoke to just now, we need to be doing as much as we can to mitigate those. So oftentimes there will be more supplementation because we're trying to keep you as healthy as possible. So that incurs additional expenses and additional organization. So like understanding that, and then also additional costs in terms of coaching fees for sure. And also like the suit, women's suits are super expensive. They're not cheap. And like the heels that you need and like the bling and the show day, like the tan, the hair, the, like all the fun stuff, it's all very costly. So you want to make sure your finances are in a good place, and start maybe like putting away some money for a rainy day. But I could go on about this, but first and foremost, like get with a knowledgeable coach that is going to take your health into account. Make sure you guys are aligned and on the same page. Would really be the biggest one.
Absolutely. Um, I would say, am I thinking? I feel like was this a question or was this a comment? I feel like I saw that she was working with the lady who asked the question is working with Aaron Straker. Is that right?
Oh, that does seem vaguely familiar.
So like you're in
Maybe.
incredible hands
Okay, so
there.
you're with a knowledgeable coach.
Yeah, you're in incredible hands
Yep,
there, right? So you can, if that's the case, excellent, right? You're
go for it.
yeah, just you this great coach. Just you can fully trust there. Um, I would, but like less specific in this case too, like the question asker, but just in general, I would say I would make sure, like, if you're considering it, just again, like, what's the why behind why you want to do this?
Mm,
I've like been on calls with with potential clients in the past who wanted to like do something like to compete just because they like hated where they were at, and it was
oh
like the
yeah.
thing to motivate them to like transform. And I've also worked with a lot of clients like after going through something like that. And dude, it never like psychologically, it never works out well.
Yeah.
It is a brutal, brutal, not necessarily. I think if you're not in the right mindset, it can be a pretty brutal thing, right? I
Yeah.
would like go into it. If you're doing it, do it because I love physique development. I love challenging myself and pushing myself. And I want to see like what it's like to take things to the next level. And again, basically because for like the love of the game,
Yeah.
rather than because you don't like where you're at and you want this to be like the vessel for transformation.
Yeah.
Because if that's the driver behind it, you'll get to that point. You will probably look like, wow, I've never seen myself look this good. And you're going to look that way for a day. And then it'll
Yeah.
be gone. Not that like you can stay leaner, of course. But I also think when like people approach from that place, like the post diet period is a lot harder as well. So I think just again, really thinking through everything that Natalie mentioned there, plus that would be what I would recommend. Anything else to add there before we wrap it up?
So important to point out. That was a good one.
Thank you. All right, we have a lot more questions, so if we didn't answer yours, we will get to them. We'll definitely have to record another Q&A or two or three here. But I love all the questions. Thank you
Thank
guys.
you so much for everyone who
Yeah,
submitted.
we do really appreciate it. It'll be fun to continue to work through these. But that's what we have for y'all for today. As always, we appreciate you guys tuning in. If you enjoy the show, leave us a 5-star rating and review. If you want to work with our team, hit the link in the show notes, and we will talk to you guys next time.